Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow orders to the letter to spite someone they really dislike. And in today's episode, people are fighting back against their bosses because what's worse than working for power-tripping Karen bosses, right? I hope you enjoy the stories today. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this is a story that my dad told me the other day, and I thought I would share here. My dad's been working for the same company for about 30 plus years now. My dad is extremely smart, and I don't say that lightly. He graduated high school early, and he's always excelled in mathematics, physics, and most tech-related areas. That said, my dad began working for Company X after finishing his associate's degree. He was taking some time off before going back to school as he and my mom just got married and he needed money. So my dad began working in Company X's printing press room as he didn't have the academic credentials to apply for the job he really wanted at the time. The company printed everything from books to magazines to newspapers and the like. According to my dad, he really enjoyed working in the press room. It was a lot of manual labor, and he was stuck on second shift, but he really liked his coworkers and enjoyed learning about the machines they used, as well as how to run and repair them. My dad has a great work ethic. He always works hard, as did most of his coworkers. But apparently, the boss at the time was kind of crappy. My dad had been working the job for several months when he got the flu. He of course called in sick that day to rest and recover, but his boss wouldn't have it. The boss told him he had to come into work or it would count against him when it was time for reviews. It was clearly an unfair and ridiculous rule. So my dad came into work that day with a fever and nausea, and he carried around a trash can with him for most of the day. It was a long and brutal shift, and he was thrilled to finally leave. By the time he left though, everybody else on second shift had been exposed to the flu, as well as everyone coming in for third shift. The company ended up having to shut down the printing press for almost a whole week, because nearly every press room worker was sick with the flu. While I'm not sure my dad had planned such a glorious outcome, he was very smug telling me this story, and he said he would do it again. My dad went back to school and he finished his degree and he got a job much higher in the company. And he now has quite a few people working beneath him. He never gives his employees a hard time when they need to take sick days. And that's exactly how it should be, right? Like if you have sick days available and you tell your boss you need to take a sick day, the only thing they should be saying is okay. I just hate the fact that some bosses literally think they fully control their workers and threaten them with bad performance reviews or unemployment. And this person comments, I had an older boss straight up call me a liar over the phone when I told her I was sick. She said I'd better come in or there would be consequences. Even though I said that I'll still come in if I felt better in the morning. I was 18, it was my first job, and I didn't know how to respond to that. However, my dad was next to me and he overheard her. He grabbed the phone from me and he yelled at her that I wasn't coming in. And if she tried to fire me for that, he would take legal action. We went to the clinic the next day and the doctor wrote me a note for multiple days off just to spite her. Awesome dad and awesome doctor for going against that boss. This happened almost a year ago. I don't work there anymore, so I feel safe posting. I used to earn some pocket money as a tutor, working with K-12 kids in an after-school program. Last fall, I caught the flu. I was coughing, hacking, sneezing, and had a fever. I was definitely sick and definitely contagious. The problem was I also developed laryngitis, meaning I couldn't call off work as I couldn't speak. So I texted and emailed my boss at 9 a.m. to let them know, as my shift started at 4 p.m. 4 hours later, at 1 p.m., my boss replied, "Sorry, we can't find someone to take over for you. I guess you'll have to come in." Now I sat there panicking because A, I didn't want to get the kids sick, B, I didn't want to make myself worse by working with kids, and C, there was no way I was coming in feeling how I was feeling. So I begged them to reconsider, but no dice. I texted other coworkers, seeing if someone could trade shifts, but no luck. And that's when I remembered an interesting policy. Tutors had to be there 20 minutes before their first student arrived, so they could get the area ready with needed materials, read over notes from previous sessions, set up their table with school supplies, etc. I also remembered that I was the first person scheduled, meaning that when I got there, I would be the only person there besides administration. I purposely didn't take any medication for the rest of the day. My symptoms went from annoying to bad. I was hacking. My eyes looked glassy, I was extremely pale, the whole shebang. I then put on not one, but 3 N95 masks. I changed my clothes and then put on 2 layers of surgical gloves, because there's no reason to get the kids sick, although they were probably the ones to give it to me in the first place. I then walk into the admin's office, sounding like I had the plague. A perfectly timed sneeze and coughing fit hit me just as I approached the open door. Her office was quite long, so I never got within 10 feet of her. Still, she looked fully panicked as I croaked, "Well, I'm here." Amazingly, she found a way to take over my students that day. I was in the building for less than 5 minutes. So this comes from about 15 years ago, when I was, and still am, working with people with disabilities in a community home. It's a great job for those who like it, but it's a terrible one for those who don't, meaning that any staff you meet are either very new or long-term like myself. As a consequence, the turnover rate of staff is very high, and the replacement staff are slow to be hired, meaning you often find shifts not covered straight away. This is an industry where simply not having a shift filled isn't an option, particularly where I work, which is in a house with a single day staff and a single night staff, each working 12 shifts on a 7-day spread over 2 weeks roster. That said, there are some strict rules regarding the hours you can work. It's intended to avoid burnout, but more used to keep a reign of overtime, which in our industry paid 70% of your hourly rate for the first 3 hours, and 100% for any time after that. You can't demand overtime, but if they require you to work longer, they can't not pay you overtime. It's also worth noting that the people we work with are vulnerable, meaning they can't be left unsupervised. Long story short, you can't go home until your replacement arrives. So back in the early 2000s, we were having problems locating staff, lots of people working overtime, and a lot of fresh faces appearing and disappearing. The house I worked in wasn't difficult in particular, for adults with intellectual disability, but there was no support. By which I mean the worker there had to fend for themselves. There was no supervisor in the next building. They were miles and miles away. I'd frequently at the time have to stay back for half an hour or an hour, waiting for staff to come replace me. I was less than happy with the way it was handled each time I called the office to tell them the night staff haven't arrived. Do you know who's booked? To which I'd get the reply, "We're still looking. How late can you stay?" The obvious answer was, "Until I'm replaced." But what I often said is I'd prefer not to stay after the end of my shift, but that doesn't seem to matter now, so I'll stay here until someone comes. Each time a new face arrived, I'd give them all the information they'd need for a shift. I'd introduce them, walk them through their duties, etc., and this would take 20 to 30 minutes. The point being is I don't just jump ship when a staff arrives to replace me. This is someone else's home, and I like them, so I'm not gonna leave them in the hands of someone uninformed. That said, cut to that weekend. My roster had me working 12-hour days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Come Friday night, my replacement doesn't arrive, so I waited. I then sent a text message to the supervisor after 15 minutes, and then called after 30. I left a message, and when they eventually called back, I could tell they hadn't found a replacement. I told them I'd stay until they did. This was by that time an hour after I was meant to finish, 10 p.m. Come 11 o'clock, they call me, and they say they simply can't find a replacement. They offer a deal, and they say, if I stay and do the night shift, I can take the next shift off. It's pretty even, so you won't miss out, they said. They then changed their tone and said, "It's not really a request. We have no other option. Treat this as a direction." I reminded them that it was a passive house, meaning you got half the hourly rate from midnight, but you could sleep in the bed provided, so I'd actually be taking a pay cut. They didn't know what else they could do, so I made a suggestion. I say I would stay and do the night shift, but I wasn't going to give up my next shift. I was gonna do that one as well. They agreed, as that meant they didn't need to find a replacement for me in the morning, so they thought it was a good deal for them. It was, however, an even better deal for me. It took a few emails over the weekend with the union to sort out the particulars, but what happened was this. Once I couldn't leave my work site because of a lack of replacement, I was on overtime. And as this overtime was because of a direction, not voluntary, it remained in place until I went home. And because I didn't agree to drop my following day shift, my overtime continued until I ended on Saturday night. The upside being that working 36 hours in a row resulted in the equivalent of 60 hours of pay. I was the first person to pull this stunt, as they say, and word got around that if you didn't get replaced, you were actually the person who was in a position of power. It didn't take long until the department puts a little more effort into training and employing extra staff, so something like this never happened again. Not at least to me. Oh boy, I just love a good story where management agrees for things and they don't know the impact, just to try to solve an immediate problem. But I guess, as OP said, management wasn't the best there. But yeah, staying later to help people, screw over your boss, and putting extra money in your pocket, what a malicious compliance that was. One last thing, guys, like working 36 hours in a row sounds absolutely brutal, doesn't it? Like, that's a ridiculous amount of hours, and my question is, do labor laws even allow that? And if you enjoyed that story, this person also shares their story. I used to work as a server for a casual restaurant. The managers there were lazy, and they were constantly adding new, stupid policies that nobody wanted to follow. I was a good employee. I showed up on time, worked to the best of my ability on shift, even going above and beyond for customers at points, because the customers' opinions mattered way more to me than that of a manager's. That said, the first time I got a cold and called in sick, the managers called me out at the next staff meeting, and they said I was being a bad member by letting everyone down and calling in sick to get out of doing my work. Soon after this, they implemented a new policy. They said all employees who are unable to attend their shift must find their own replacements, or else they must show up. Now, I found this ridiculous, as it's the manager's job to find someone to take a shift if one employee can't make it. So one morning, when I woke up with a high fever at 9 a.m., I spent the hour texting the limited amount of coworker contacts, seeing if they could cover my shift for me. Of course, they all said no, as it was pretty last minute. So after an hour of attempting to find my replacement, I call my manager at 9:55. 5 minutes before my shift was supposed to start. The conversation went as follows. I say, "Hi, manager. I woke up with a fever this morning and I feel very unwell, so I'm not able to come to work today." Manager says, "When's your shift?" I reply, 10 to 4, sir. Now, on the inside, I was thinking, shouldn't he know my shift, as he's the one who schedules the shifts? He says, "Okay, so have you found your replacement to take your shift?" I reply, "No, sir. I just spent the last 55 minutes contacting everyone I have the information of, which was only 6 people. They were all unavailable." He then says to me, "So you need to come to work today because you have no replacement, yes?" That's when I said, "I have a fever. It's not safe for me to come to work to handle food. That would be unfair to the customers." Manager then says, "Well, then I need a doctor's note." I reply, "Okay, but my doctor doesn't take same-day appointment requests. I can bring a note next week when my doctor is available. However, the note won't say anything, as most fevers don't last more than a couple of days." At this point, he was silent. And I respond, "I tried to the best of my ability to find a replacement for my shift due to your policy, but I only have contacts for a few coworkers. I do believe you have a complete list of all the workers here, and you can contact them on my behalf. But the policy says I have to do that, so I did. At this point, he was mad, and he said, if you call in sick like this again, I will have to write you up. I reply, yes sir, I understand. I apologize for the inconvenience. The next time I showed up to work, my coworker told me that since my shift had basically started by the time he hung up the phone, he didn't have time to go through the list and find me a real replacement. So my manager had to be my replacement and work as a server. The policy still existed after that, but no one followed it, and I quit a few months later. So here's some backstory. I started working in elderly care before I graduated high school at the age of 17 as a temp worker. And after I graduated, I basically worked full-time for several years before I finally got steady employment at 23. I take pride in my job. And even though I didn't study medical stuff, I've always made sure I know everything I need to do a good job. With online classes, certificates, reading up on medications, treatment recommendations, etc. Everything was going well, despite me having 4 different bosses in the first 5 years of work. And why's that, you ask? Well, the pay was lousy and no one wants to be the boss here. And economically speaking, it's a sinking ship, since it's government-run and dependent on tax money. And then one day, the good boss, who I'll call Lena, joins the story. She asked me to move to a new department, as the state was now required by law to provide short-term care. She had previously run the emergency care unit at the local hospital, and she doesn't take crap from anyone. She let us workers build up and run the department as any good boss should. And she realized that we knew better than her because we were doing it day to day. Everything was amazing for almost 2 years. Every month, I did the schedules for all 15 workers. I did the daily planning for all the patients as well. I was in charge of all documentation and all new guidelines and protocols being implemented, since the care provided was brand new in our area. Then the day of great sadness came when Lena declared that she was leaving, since she had been offered a job as the head chief of the local hospital. All of us were devastated to see her go, but I mean, good for her. That's when super bitch Karen enters the story. She was already the boss of the normal elder care units, where I'd worked before, and we had heard exclusively bad things about her. We heard that she would always do what she thought was the right thing to do, which was almost always exclusively wrong, because she was underqualified, had no experience from actual work, and she was just a bitch in general. Our first staff meeting, she told us, either you're with me or against me, and the people who are against me, I will drown in the lake. Which I thought to myself, okay, great start. I then tried to explain to her that with our previous boss, we'd worked with trust, since Lena had an understanding that us workers actually know what works best in our department. And Karen instantly shuts it down. She screams and says, no, I'm the boss. I set the protocols and I decide how my departments run. I reply, yes, of course, but I'm just saying that we've been working like... She then stops me right there and says, no, I'm the boss. I'm in charge. And so it began. Karen starts changing the schedules, the protocols, the staff requirements, the daily rehab schedule, and the food schedule. And she lowered the required medical competence to work in our unit. This means there were people working with us who had no prior experience on the job, had no prior experience in the field, barely spoke the language, etc. Keep in mind, we had dementia evaluation, end-of-life care, stroke rehabilitation, and so on. So cue the malicious compliance. She starts trying to micromanage everything we did, like everything. She canceled all the activities we did for the whole business, like pub nights for the elderly, movie nights, summer cafes outdoors, walks, store visits, everything. She stated that we were no longer allowed to finish the schedules on our own, and she gave us 2 weeks less to finish them, which means we now have 1 week to input the schedule, try to settle it between us 15 people, and then hand it to her. She would finish it and then hand it to us the day before it went into effect. And 8 out of 10 days, the shifts weren't covered, or we were 6 people working the same weekend when it was supposed to be 3. So that's when I tell Karen that I've been managing the schedule for years, and I was happy to keep doing it, and that she would still have it 2 weeks early. But no. I also told her that our activities were 100% within paid hours and no strain on the day-to-day normal business, and we want to keep doing them. Also, no. I then told her that we'd prefer to keep doing things the way we'd been doing them for years because it works very well. Also, no. Now obviously I was pissed, and so were my coworkers, but they never spoke up. That was my job, I guess. There were a lot of incidents that I'm not gonna bother bringing up. But just imagine that anything we ever wanted to do for our patients, or the people in dementia units, or for the staff, was all no. All that said, one thing that had been consistent since I started working there to when I was 27 at this point in the story is when you apply for vacation or any kind of leave, you input the leave request and then you request a temp to cover your shift. And then you inform your boss that you've done both of those things. It's always been like that. Always. So I did. I requested a day's leave as my mom had a doctor's thing in a town a few hours from here. I input the temp request and then I walked to Karen's office and informed her, and she loses it. Maybe it's because her boss was there, I don't know, but she starts yelling, telling me that I'm not allowed to request temps, as that's her job. I just stand there and take it like a good employee, and I say, okay, won't happen again. Big surprise for her when the next staff meeting comes around, and there suddenly weren't any staff on the actual ward, and the local politician was sat waiting with her mother, who was being committed to my ward that day for over 2 hours. I wonder who made sure they were arriving at that time on that day. I told Karen's boss exactly why there weren't any temps scheduled for the meeting, and she got fired. It'll make me smile for the rest of my life. Can't say she didn't deserve that, right? Like OP did try to warn her, but she just had to power trip in front of her boss to show everyone who's boss, and I thought that was really unnecessary. Also, I've never understood why some companies just choose to move middle managers around between departments rather than promote the actual stars of the department. Like everyone can agree that OP should have been the boss, right? Not Karen. Talk about adding negative value. So I've been working in my field for a while, and I've always taken pride in doing a thorough, reliable job. I'm a high performer, and I have a solid track record with my previous bosses, who valued quality and consistency. But then Eric became our new boss, and things took a hard turn. Eric was all about efficiency. The guy came from a startup environment where things didn't need to be perfect, just right and fast. He wanted things done fast, even if it meant cutting corners. In meetings, he would throw around phrases like time is money and every second counts. And sure, efficiency is important, but Eric took it to an extreme. He didn't care about the quality of our work, he just wanted it done now. Nuances, quality checks, and double checking went right out the window. Then one day, he decides to implement a time tracking and output policy. This meant logging every task we worked on with specific time limits, and anyone taking longer than his limits were flagged, and we'd have to explain ourselves in weekly efficiency reviews. Essentially, the new rule was, don't need to do it completely right, just do it fast. Of course, I tried explaining to him that rushing through things would lead to mistakes, but he literally says to me, I'm the boss, you need to do what I say. He insisted that this would maximize productivity. Frustrated, but willing to play by his rules, I decided to give him exactly what he asked for. If Eric wanted speed, I would deliver speed. Once a meticulous worker, I now stopped double-checking anything. Tasks that normally took an hour to review and refine, I was now completing in 15 minutes, barely glancing at them. Documents that required analysis, I would just throw some data together and call it a day. And anything that usually got a thorough review now only got a quick single pass, tops. Naturally, errors began cropping up. Typos, incorrect numbers, misplaced data, bad presentations, mistakes were everywhere. But technically, I was working exactly within Eric's time limits. Eric was thrilled how much faster I was working, and he even starts bragging in meetings how efficient our team had become. Then the clients start to notice. One of our biggest accounts found a major error in a document that I'd whipped together at record speed. That led to an awkward phone call with Eric, and more issues came up. After about 2 weeks of optimized efficiency, I got called into his office with his boss. Eric, visibly irritated, starts screaming at me, asking me why the quality of my work had taken such a nosedive. That's when I calmly explain that I was meeting all of his time limits exactly as instructed. I told him that quality work requires time, which I simply didn't have under his new policy. Eric just sat there in silence, realizing that his policy had backfired. His boss just stared at him, completely stunned and red in the face. After an awkward pause, Eric mutters about reevaluating time limits on tasks. His boss then sent me out of the room, and I heard him berating Eric immediately. The efficiency policy quietly disappeared soon after. Now, I'm back to doing my job properly. Eric's under performance review, and his boss is closely involved with all operations, especially with big clients. Why reinvent the wheel when things are working fine? And why try to rein in the high performers to stamp your authority? Another instance where a new boss comes in and destroys a well-oiled machine. Like, it's just so funny how some bosses insist on their own way of doing things, ruins everything, and in the end, everything goes back to the way it was. Like, that's just a sign of a bad boss. Power tripping and putting their stamp on things with changes before they even know a thing about what and who they're in charge of. I only wish Eric was demoted because that would have been so satisfying. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r / malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r / pro revenge episode. I haven't done those in a while, where a psycho Karen tries to destroy OP's family's life, and it backfires so hard. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.